fascinating as always. My name is François Baird. I'm an African migrant worker because I was born in Africa and I'm now a US citizen. However, today I have homework for parliamentarians. You have to answer an exam question. The exam question is this: what are you doing to ensure stability in Africa by ensuring or enabling that African nations can use local energy resources for food and energy access? That's the issue. The coup in Gabon this week is just another symptom of the instability disease that affects resource-rich African countries where the population lack access to energy. When people lack access to energy, there's unemployment and food insecurity. This was also a major topic of discussion at the BRICS summit last week. In fact, China made a big show of a donation for equipment to keep the lights on at hospitals and other public institutions in South Africa, the most industrialized country in Africa. A major topic of conversation was collaboration to improve access to affordable energy. And that is really at the heart of what we need to get done in Africa. So if you look at this, Africa desperately needs more energy, more electricity particularly. Without a reliable electricity supply, economies will not grow, businesses will not create jobs, and poverty levels increase. I don't have to prove that, it's simply true. Everyone knows that. However, if you don't do that, and you don't have enough electricity, there's more hunger, less food security, and instability. So, South Africa is proof of that. But it's also obvious in other parts of the world, particularly in Africa. Electricity is essential to modern agriculture. You've heard all the previous speakers telling you that energy goes together with national security, it goes together with human development. And when you cannot meet the supply, suddenly you're faced with food security. This happened in South Africa, where there were riots in 2021. And they have power cuts on a daily basis. That's bringing people to the realization that South Africa is at the risk of food insecurity. Not at a national level, but at a household level, because people cannot afford to buy the food that's available. Now, Africa has the largest, fastest growing population in the world. 1.4 billion people, expected to increase to 1.7 billion people by 2030, and yet access to electricity is going backwards. The International Energy Agency links this directly, this backward move in electricity supply, to increasing poverty and declining food security. The IEA reported last year that 4% more people in Africa lived without electricity in 2021 than in 2019. And this leads to real worries about hungry people resorting to desperate measures. When that happens, poverty and hunger leads to conflict. And conflict is what leads to complete instability in Africa. In the whole of Africa, 282 million people were experiencing hunger. That's more than double the rest of the world. So this homework is really important. And it's not only homework for African nations, it's homework for everyone. Because Africa faces El Nino this year, from this year. This weather influencer is going to make things even worse, which brings us back to electricity. By the way, if you look at the way in which Africans are influenced by a lack of access to energy, it is literally depriving, cutting off their future. And that's because child stunting, which means that children under 5 cannot get enough food to develop properly and therefore become stunted for the rest of their lives, is extremely high in Africa, highest in the world. So, social unrest in a continent where most people are young. It's a youthful continent. And we have to support the future. We cannot allow anyone to starve the future by cutting off resources for energy in Africa. It's vital that as we look at the future, we avoid instability. We try and get to a situation where there's not an Arab Spring in the rest of Africa. Because if you look at where the fragile states are, the ground zero is in Africa. And it's demonstrated by all the coups. If you overlay coup activity in West and Central Africa, look at the map. It's also where there's not enough energy access. The key to this is that parliamentarians have a job to do. What's your job? Well, the best way to develop and maintain a reliable energy supply to industry will be in countries where there is proper private ownership and market solutions. We have to encourage that. What are you doing to encourage that? We have to empower rule of law institutions, because no one can invest in power supply, in electricity, in energy access, unless they're assured, let's call it by its name, they can take the government to court and win, because the laws are being applied. So what are you doing about rule of law in Africa? Local energy resources like coal, oil and gas and hydropower should be financed and developed in Africa instead of cutting off finance to deprive them of energy access and literally starving their future. Electricity is an important factor in achieving national and regional food and energy security. Parliamentarians, you have the ability to ensure that agricultural and industrial innovation, by using local oil and gas for manufacturing modern fertilizers, for instance, by acting against predatory trade practices like dumping that destroys markets in Africa, and cheap energy access for farmers and food producers become a reality. So you have to stand up to those who refuse financing for the development of local energy resources in Africa. It is vital because it sustains rural livelihoods, it fights impoverishment, it combats high unemployment, and it will eventually decrease high poverty levels if you succeed. Africa has abundant energy resources. It is your job to help them use it to better effect. Thank you.